16 months later, I was just leaving the garage with the last box of things to load into my minivan when I paused for a second as I saw Miri's car pull into the driveway of the house. It was the first time she had returned from that memorable conversation in the kitchen during which she had so coldly thrown the divorce petition at me. So at this point, of course, she was the last person I expected to see today. When she got out of the car, I greeted her. "Miranda, aren't you violating the restraining order by being here?" I asked in an even and neutral tone. "The ban ceased to apply on the day we divorced." She waved it off, playing with her keyring. "How are you doing?" I shrugged. "Things are as white as soot. I live in the present and dream of a bright future. Would you like some coffee?" I threw over my shoulder, already returning to the house. "That would be great," she replied, following me. By this time, there was nothing left in the house except a few boxes and a lonely dining table in the kitchen. All household appliances and one of the bedroom sets were left to the new owners. The sale of the rest of the furniture and other household items among neighbors and acquaintances, carried out over the past couple of days, was very successful. What was left over will soon be sent to the landfill. The son of one of my former work colleagues promised to do this for me the day before I handed over the keys to the new residents. His wife and her friend also volunteered to help me with the final cleaning and organizing of the rooms of the house, although I tried unsuccessfully to refuse. A lonely greeting card lay lonely on the mantelpiece in the living room. Since I turned 38 a couple of days ago, my colleagues at the office gathered to send it to me, with warm congratulations from all of them, as well as another card, wishing great luck in the new place, which I had already packed with my luggage. The company I worked for over 19 years has always been very kind to me, and it was with sadness and great regret that I was leaving behind some good friends, but it had to be done. There was nothing keeping me here anymore. Having made coffee and each taking a mug of hot drink, we sat down in the same places where we were face-to-face 16 months ago. "So, why do I suddenly have the pleasure of being in your company on this beautiful day?" Having taken a sip, I asked with detached curiosity, because I could not understand what prompted Miri to return here again after she abruptly and mercilessly cut off all the loose ends between us. "Don't you guess?" She snorted with visible displeasure. "The children received letters from you saying that you were moving somewhere. I don't understand why you didn't just call them and tell them about it. Why did you need to notify them by registered mail? In fact, I did just that because it was the only way to be sure that they would know that I was moving. Otherwise, of course, they would have unleashed all the dogs on me, accusing me of disappearing in English. Actually, I was just calling them—" "Oh, wait a minute," I chuckled. "Small correction. I called Kelly because I can't call Luke." "What are you talking about? Why can't you call Luke?" Miri asked, puzzled. "I don't have his number," I sighed. "Listen, the fact is that the children don't want to keep in touch with me," I explained, seeing from her ironically raised eyebrows that she didn't believe my words at all. "Well, I'm going to have to show my ex-wife how our kids really feel about me." My phone was on the table in front of me, so I unlocked it and dialed Kelly's number, putting it on speaker. The caller beeped 10 long times before going to voicemail. I pressed end and looked at Miri. "Couldn't you call her? Would you be so kind?" "Kelly must just be busy," she answered me as if making excuses, but still took out her mobile phone and dialed our daughter's number, also putting the phone on speakerphone. It is noteworthy that her call was answered almost immediately after the second ring. "Hello, Mom. How are you?" Kelly's cheerful voice rang out. "I'm fine, honey. What are you doing now?" "Well, right now we're chilling with Cassie. We're going to a party later, so at this moment we're just lying around and saving energy," my daughter answered with a giggle and a drawn-out laziness. "Have you heard any news from your father?" Miri asked, looking at me and arching her eyebrow meaningfully. "Yes, I talked to him last night. He said he talked to you and promised he'd pick up Cassie and me today. Yeah, in about 10 minutes. I think he's going to grab Luke later too, before we all go to the party." Kelly chirped. I felt my insides clench painfully as I heard my daughter call Dad Daddy. Miri could always read me like an open book, so she saw how much that little thoughtless comment from Kelly hurt me. Clenching my fists, I simply leaned back in my chair and stared blankly at the ceiling. "You mean Dan?" Miri asked incredulously, as if not believing what she had just heard. "Well, yes, Mom, who else?" Kelly continued to giggle. "By the way, he really likes it when I call him Dad. And in any case, you know that he will still become my father in 3 weeks," she reminded her mother. "In 3 weeks, my ex-wife was supposed to get married again. Believe it or not, they even sent me an invitation to their celebration. Yeah, right now, as if I was really going to show up there." "Kelly Ann, I'm asking you, when was the last time you talked to your real father?" Miri asked impatiently, raising her voice slightly, in which stern notes appeared. "Oh, Mom. Well, I don't remember. Maybe a few weeks ago." Sensing something wrong in her mother's voice, Kelly's amused tone immediately disappeared. I opened and showed her my call log for Kelly's number, and Miri, glancing at the screen, could see my numerous but unsuccessful attempts to reach my daughter. To be honest, none of my children have called me since Miri left, not a single call in almost a year and a half. That's funny to hear because I'm sitting next to him right now, and I saw with my own eyes how he tried to call you just a minute before I did. "What's going on, Kelly?" Miri asked in an even more stern voice. "Oh, well, Mom, came our daughter's confused bleating from the speaker. "I just want to remind you that you only have one father, and it's not Dan." "We'll talk seriously about this later, young lady," the mother promised harshly, ending the conversation and irritably poking the end call button. Miranda was clearly upset as she turned off the call and pushed the phone away from her. "So why don't you have Luke's number?" She returned to the question again. FYI, Dan made sure the boy had a new phone and memorized his number within hours of his old phone being stolen. If only I knew. I shrugged. "Listen, don't be too strict with the children. Apparently, such was their love and affection for me that after a little over a year they found me completely unnecessary." Smiling darkly, I intertwined my fingers and squeezed them tightly. "You heard your daughter. She is happy that she will now have a new father. You know that old saying, out of sight, out of mind? Well, apparently, for Kelly, I am already an empty place." I pointed to my long list of calls on my phone. "As you can see, I no longer have anything to do with the children. And, as far as I know, in 3 weeks, I will be officially replaced by the real Dad." This comment, as I saw it, really hurt her, but it was the sad truth. "I think that since you left, I've talked to both of them, combined, for a total of no more than an hour. Although I tried to stay in touch, God, I really tried. Remembering one of these typical moments, I smiled bitterly. The time I was able to get tickets to the Braves game on opening day of the season, I was so pleased and happy. But when I called Luke with the news, he said he was too busy to have fun. I sighed and looked up at Miri's frozen figure opposite me. And later I found out that he and Dan and a couple of other guys went to that very game, buying tickets at the last minute. Well, if that's what they want to do, I can't force them to do otherwise." We were silent for a few moments, lost in our thoughts, before Miri changed the subject with a quiet cough. "So you're moving out of here to be closer to your parents?" "Not really. I have to leave so I can look after my mother. Now she needs constant care and attention." "Oh my God! Did something happen to her? How does your father deal with this? You never told me anything that she had any problems," she exclaimed, while her eyes sparkled with tears. "Well, at least Miri really loved my parents. Mom has a late stage of Alzheimer's disease. This is very bad because she doesn't remember anything at all 90% of the time. As for Dad, we buried him a little over 3 weeks ago. The hospital said he had a heart attack, although personally I think his heart was broken, and Dad left because he was suffering too much from disappointment and pain." "Oh no!" My ex-wife burst into tears, and through her sobs asked, How How do you know it was a broken heart and why didn't you call us? Of course I called, I objected tiredly. And to tell you the truth, that was the last time I talked to Kelly. Yeah, it was the day after Thanksgiving. That's when I found out that Luke had a new number. And our conversation with Kelly lasted no more than a minute. Without even trying to listen to what I wanted to tell her, she hastily blurted out that she was incredibly busy and would call me back soon. It's a pity that neither that day nor a week later, my daughter never called me back. I myself called her every day for a couple of weeks until I finally understood what the reason was. Ironically, although my kids blocked me on Facebook, they didn't block my dad. I later found out that when Kelly told me she was very busy, it was because she was going to the Black Friday sale that day with you and Grandma Roberts, I said sarcastically, using my air balloons, quotes. As for how I can know that my father died of a broken heart, that's easy. I never told my parents about our divorce. Yes, I was going to do it sooner or later, but I never could, I admitted, looking away and feeling tears welling up in my eyes. Brushing them away with the back of my hand, I took a deep breath and continued. When you left, I went to them the next weekend to talk about what happened between us, face to face. When I got there, I discovered how bad my mother's condition had become. Dad had told me before how forgetful she was sometimes, but since I last saw them the Christmas before last, her condition had seriously deteriorated. You obviously never knew about this, because not once in the last 3 years have you been able to go with me to their place when I took the children there. I could not resist directly hinting at those compelling reasons that, as we now both knew well, prevented Miri from accompanying me and the children every time. Because of my mother's illness, I did not, have the right to bring this news to both of them then, and every week it became more and more difficult to do this. Anyway, on Thanksgiving Day, after we had finished the holiday dinner and put Mom to rest, Dad began asking me questions persistently, because he had not heard anything from you or the children for over a year. So I had to tell him the truth about our breakup and your leaving. Miri, tense as a string, sat opposite me, placing her sharp elbows on the table and covering her mouth with both palms. Only eyes shining with tears and trembling eyelashes lived on her pale face. In the morning, I found my father in his favorite chair. I dully continued my sad story. He was sitting, leaning back and clutching our family photograph in his hands, the same sunny one in which all 4 of us laugh and fool around. She was still wet from his tears. So yeah, Miri, our divorce broke his heart. You know, Mom and Dad were married for 52 years. He was a man of the old school and, of course, hoped that you and I would be together until our death. I could no longer hold back the tears that continued to draw wet paths down my cheeks as I once again relieved that dark day. Rising sharply from the table, I turned to the window and stared at the pale blue sky with rare clouds floating across it. Miri's sniffles and quiet sobs could be heard behind her, resting my aching forehead against the cool glass. A minute later, without turning around, I spoke quietly again. It was at the funeral that I suddenly realized how much I'm alone in this world. The only people present at my farewell to Dad were me, the chaplain, and a couple of their neighbors. Nobody else came. I couldn't even bring my mother to the funeral, because she wouldn't even be able to understand what was happening. Only a week or 2 after the funeral, when my mother had recovered sufficiently, did I dare to tell her that my father was no longer with us? But I still can't stand the pain it causes her every time she hears and realizes it. So now when Mom asks about him, I just say that he went out for a while and will be back soon. Miri was already sobbing unashamedly, but I had no more tears left to cry. Over the past weeks, I had been emotionally completely devastated. My distracted gaze, wandering around the room, fell on the mantelpiece and stopped at the lonely greeting card lying on it. Miri, raising her red, tear-stained eyes, followed my gaze and obviously noticed what I was looking at. I continued in the same neutral, distant, and seemingly alien voice. You know, maybe I'm lonely. And even my mother doesn't recognize me now. but I owe her a huge debt just for bringing me into this world. So yes, I am packing everything here so that I can be there to look after her for however long she has left in this world. Finally, I turned to my ex-wife and stood up straight, crossing my arms over my chest. A bitter grimace of sarcasm permeated my last words to the one I loved so much for many years while we were together. It's amazing, isn't it? What were the consequences of your actions, and how many people did it affect? You destroyed our marriage, you destroyed my relationship with my children, and on top of that, you destroyed my family. I finished the story, letting out the anger and poisonous accusation in my voice that I promised myself not to show, but I just couldn't do anything about it. Don't you dare blame all this on me. Miranda jumped up in response. Unlike you, Dan is devoted to me, and do not forget that you changed to me with Sandy Thompson. Jumping up from her seat and instantly blushing, she pointed her finger in my direction with indignation. I'm sure she didn't expect that in response to the accusation thrown right in the face, I would start laughing. And not just laughing, but really bursting into laughter, to the point of tears in my eyes. Oh yes, of course, I replied, barely catching my breath. Let's not forget about Sandy Thompson, the reason you spent 15+ years planning your revenge perfectly. I still remember that evening when you categorically told me not to mention her name in this house. Otherwise, you would immediately take the children and leave me forever. The ex-wife raised her chin arrogantly and defiantly crossed her arms over her chest, continuing to look at me defiantly. Well, Miri, now that you have, despite everything, carried out all your threats, I believe that this train has already left. But I still want you to hear this, once and for all. I never, not touched, to Sandy Thompson,